Perfect. So just as a reminder to everyone that we are recording this webinar and it will be shared on the USAID ASAP website later today. We'll share a link to that in the chat in just a little while. So today's webinar is business development. We're going to be focusing on components of a resource mobilization strategy, identifying resources, submitting competitive proposals, and budgets. So a few quick notes. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. If you could possibly use the Q&A box for all of your questions, certainly you can use the chat to interact with other attendees and with the presenter today, but for your questions, it's really helpful for us if you can put it in the Q&A box, which is a second box at the bottom of your screen. You'll see it there. You can pop that open and you can ask questions both with your name or anonymously. It's totally up to you. And we do have a couple of question periods throughout the webinar today, so we'll be answering questions throughout. We have one poll that's going to pop up about 15 minutes before the end of the webinar today, and it's a general satisfaction poll. You don't have to do anything. It's going to pop up on your screen, and then you can go ahead and put in your answers and what you think about today's webinar. As usual, the presentation for today is being recorded, and we're going to put it on the ASAP website. This is the link to it, but I will go ahead and share it in the chat so that you can click right through. So this is actually our 76th webinar. We have broadcasted 75 up until today. We've had more than 15,000 attendances, and we're really, really glad to be able to put these on for USAID and PEPFAR. And again, we'll share the link in just a little while. So you can go back and watch any of the other webinars from the past, including last week's webinar. If you missed that one, or if there was more information in it you'd like to check out, that one is already online as well. Our webinars are available in multiple languages. So not every webinar at the moment is available in all, but we do have Portuguese and French webinars in addition to English ones. And on the website, you can actually filter by language. We're hoping to be able to expand that one day. And the webinar will also be shared along with the presentation PDF. So you can also look through that in case there's any information you missed during the presentation today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter. Kimberly Riddle is the Director for Public Business Development at PACT. And Kimberly's here with a fantastic presentation. So I'm going to pass it over to her now. Let me stop sharing. There we go. Over to you, Kimberly. Oh, sorry, Kimberly, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Nice to be with you all today. Give me just one moment to share the presentation. Can folks see this okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, Susan. As she mentioned, I will be covering today some critical aspects of business development, particularly components of a resource mobilization strategy, identifying resources, and then submitting competitive proposals and budgets. There'll be opportunities for questions after part one and then also at the end. And we'll do a summary as well as some of the key takeaways from the presentation. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. So part one will focus on components of the resource mobilization strategy. And this section just pulls from USAID's new Partnership Initiative Resource Development Training. So first, before even before beginning your business development process, you'll want to ask yourself some key questions to help inform your resource mobilization strategy. The first will be, does your organization have a strategic plan? That is helpful because you'll be able to see your organization's overall goals, if there are any timelines for these goals, and how all of the strategic pieces of the plan fit into your overall mission and vision. And that'll help you to really target your resource mobilization strategy. You'll also want to consider primary hurdles that you face in securing funding. For example, do you face challenges because you don't know where to find solicitations or how to negotiate with potential partners? Or is it just not simply not having time to devote to business development? You also want to think about who is part of your resource mobilization network. In addition to those in the organization, of course, we also might have board of directors or community partners, for example, that you can leverage and reach out to if opportunities become available. And then finally, what are your top 3 goals for developing your strategy? And again, that'll help you to hone your strategy and to have specific targets and milestones in mind so that you can go back and revisit and adjust your resource mobilization strategy if it turns out some of those goals were unrealistic, and to sort of readjust so that you can better meet those targets and make sure that you are generating the revenue that you need to sustain your operations and continue implementing your great programs. So the resource mobilization process is quite iterative, and a definition of resource mobilization might be a process through which the resources that are essential for the development, implementation, and continuation of work for achieving an organization's mission are identified, pursued, and managed. And so after thinking through those questions on the previous slide, the next step that you'll want to take is identifying the needs of your organization. And this will help you to establish priorities. Strategic priorities usually refer to areas of programmatic growth that are most critical to the vision and mission of your organization. And examples of strategic priorities could include deepening an area of technical expertise, broadening a geographic area. So if you are working in one county, for example, but you want to expand to more counties, developing expertise in a new program area, or replicating or expanding a promising model or approach, perhaps one that you can bring to a potential partner for funding to scale to have greater impact. And after you identify your needs, then you'll want to do sort of a donor mapping to identify potential sources of funding. And this might be donors such as USAID, of course, or other implementers in the sector that you're working in. This can include both international or local organizations or foundations, really any source of potential funding. And then the next piece, sorry about that. The next piece then is developing your resource mobilization strategy. So once your sources are identified, and you have a clear idea about what your needs are, then you can develop a strategy that includes a structure and a system required for raising those resources. What opportunities are available? Who are the donors? Who are some of the partners that you want to speak with? How is that aligned with your strategic interest and needs? And what is going to be your plan for potentially approaching these funders or developing ideas? And then the final piece is evaluating your resource mobilization strategy. Because, as I said previously, sometimes you might not be meeting your milestones. You might have to readjust. There may be, political events on the ground that also impact the donor landscape or even needs of communities. And so you'll want to revisit and readjust as appropriate. So this is a very iterative process. The resource mobilization strategy, you don't just develop it once and then leave it there. You'll want to establish milestones, benchmarks, so that you can revisit and determine whether the strategy is effective. So as part of the donor mapping, this is pretty particular to USAID, but this can apply to any donor. But you'll want to review the donor's priorities. So USAID, for example, has the CDCS, the country development cooperation strategies, which are posted on their website, where they state what their overall goals are, as well as development objectives, and then international or intermediate results to contribute to those objectives. There are also there's also guidance on gender and social inclusion, on local capacity development. And these are also resources that you may want to review just to familiarize yourself with your donors' priorities. But this could also apply to other donors, as well as foundations or other potential partners as well. And so then after you have a better idea about your donor needs and interests, then you can consider when you want to approach that donor. And so you will already at this point understand what the donor wants by reading the documents and the guidance that they have published, or even a solicitation if it is out already. And then you will also want to consider what the situation requires. So if your organization is an expert in peace building, for example, you are going to understand the local context on the ground and the communities with whom you work, what the dynamics are, and then what is your approach to responding to the situation, and also how does that align with what the donor is asking for. What your organization can offer can be your technical expertise, your relationships with other civil society organizations, community leaders, or organizations that are working with particular populations, including women, youth, other marginalized groups. And that is what's unique to your organization, and can be aligned with what, what the donor is looking for and the types of programs that they're funding. So then when you're getting ready to approach your donor, you will want to set goals and objectives before your initial meeting and what you want to accomplish. Preparing for the meeting will help you to feel more confident, more motivated, and better equipped to accomplish the goals that you define for yourself in going into that meeting. Of course, you'll also want to understand your audience. Who, not just the donor broadly, but in this case, who are the individuals with whom you're meeting? Do they have any relationships with folks in your network? Maybe they have provided funding to a similar organization, and that organization can provide an introduction. And then in the meeting itself, it's best to keep interest of the donor in mind, because starting a conversation for the first time with someone that you don't know can be a tricky process, and often donors or other implementers are receiving many requests to meet, and so you'll want to build rapport during their first conversation. Note any commonalities you have to build that relationship. Again, if you're familiar with previous programs that they've been involved with, or if there are any personal connections that you can mention as well, would be useful. And then you can jump into leaving behind the information that you want to share. So after you build that rapport, and the person that you're speaking with understands who you are, you get a better sense of what they're looking for as well. Then you can kind of make your pitch and leave behind materials about your organization. that might describe, what are your vision, mission, values, and goals? What are some of the key populations that you work with? What areas, geographic areas, do you work with? And how might that align with some of the work that that the donor is funding? And another critical step is following up. Effective networking means that you are always nourishing your cycle of communication between your organization and then your potential donors and partners. And you can follow up with a thank you note or with even a written note or an email afterwards. And you can then send supplemental information as well, so that, again, they have a better understanding of your organization and what you can offer. And this is often very effective, even though I think that sometimes reaching out to a donor or a partner cold can be a bit intimidating. But I will say that, as an example, I was in a particular country and met with a donor just to share a mechanism that the organization that I was representing could offer. And it was a mechanism that offered capacity development to civil society organizations and media organizations. And we already had an established network of partners, and we met with USAID to describe this mechanism and to explain, how the use of this network might help USAID to achieve some of their goals. In this example, it was service delivery in the health sector. And then a few months later, we were lucky enough that the mission did decide to use this mechanism for a program that they had in mind. So this does work, even though it's a lot of work. And then for your research mobilization template, you can use something like this to establish what you're trying to achieve in your objectives. Again, how does the resource mobilization plan link to your strategic plan? What are the required resources? Do you have enough internal human resources, for example, to accomplish your goals? Do you have enough time? If travel is required, for example, do you have vehicles or time and funding to attend meetings? And then the third category is donors, other potential partners. Your funding gap is what do you what does your existing funding look like? Where do you want to go? And what is that gap? And how do you get there? And you will also want to consider if there are certain, what are the steps required to raise resources. So previously we were talking about knowing your donor, setting up the meetings. So those are what steps you will take in order to raise the resources that you need. It's also important to ensure accountability so that you know who is responsible for particular aspects of the resource mobilization strategy. Your time frame is also critical. If you know that your funding is ending in 6 months, for example, when do you need to secure new funding? And then what potential challenges might there be that you need to consider? And do roles and responsibilities align with everyone's understanding of what their role is, and are they realistic, or do they need to be adjusted? And with that, I can pause for any questions that folks have just about that resource mobilization piece.
We don't have any questions just yet, but just as a reminder to everyone, Kimberly's here to answer your questions throughout the webinar. So please go ahead and add it to the Q&A box.
Okay. All right, with that, we will just go ahead and move on then to part 2, which is identifying resources. So when we're looking at resources that are available to support your resource mobilization strategy, you're looking both internally as well as externally. This is what you can rely on or draw from to support your resource mobilization or your business development. So of course, you have your human resources. These are often the folks on your team, your technical experts, your leadership, with skills, experience, and ideas for programming that can be pitched to potential partners or donors. You also have your physical resources, any materials, tools, curriculum, for example, that can be used in programming. Social and political resources are partnerships that you already have with other donors, with international organizations, local organizations, community-based organizations, or even individuals that you can leverage, or even just kind of seek information from and share knowledge about business development or opportunities that may become available. The reputation of your own organization is also a resource, and the stronger your reputation is, the more you can potentially leverage your work history, your past partnerships for future business development. Financial resources, of course, are critical to business development. I think having unrestricted access to funding is probably more of a luxury, but will allow you to be more flexible so that you can balance the program implementation with your business development goals. And then there might be natural advantages that your organization has, such as location, proximity to other implementing organizations or other donors, or if you're implementing certain types of program, even natural resources could be one of the resources for your strategy. So we're going to focus on some internal resources, since those are the ones that are immediately available to you and the ones that are most directly under the immediate sight of those in your organization. And so I think it's first really important to emphasize that for sustainability in an organization, everyone is responsible for business development. And this includes board of directors, of course, but also senior managers at your organization, program staff, and finance and administrative staff. Often those finance and admin staff are critically keeping operations going day to day, but then also playing a critical role in helping to develop your budget. And the on your board or senior leaders in your organization are also available, hopefully, to introduce you or link you to donors, because they may already have pre-existing relationships given their leadership position, not only at the organizational level, but also in the community more generally. And I think that this is also critically important, that having committed leadership that is providing vision and direction will strengthen your resource mobilization and your business development efforts. And at that level, they can also emphasize that business development is part of everyone's role, and help to resource and support others in the organization to be able to achieve the goals that you set out for business development. So some critical roles and responsibilities for individuals in your organization. might be participating in developing a strategic plan that sets objectives and priorities of the organization and also cost them. This will often be the role of your board of directors or your leadership team. In many countries, the responsibility of the board is to ensure an organization's sustainability, and donors are often likely to fund an organization with a credible board. And so if your organization has one, then they really should be playing a large role in resource mobilization. Your team will also be responsible for drafting the resource mobilization plan with objectives, and that can be based on that template that we had a few slides back. Leadership in the organization is also responsible for mobilizing and retaining human resources. If we are not retaining our staff, then we're not able to implement our programs, and then we're also, not able to continue doing the fundraising that's required to continue to sustain an organization's operations and programs. And then there should also be somebody who's reporting to your board, to donors, and your stakeholders on the progress of implementation of your plan. And so I am wondering here if any organizations do have board of directors, and if your board is visible to you, if they're involved in resource mobilization and business development. So if so, could folks just kind of put a hand up so we can get a sense of that? Okay, starting to see a few hands go up. All right, so we have 207 attendees, and at any point, it looked like maybe 15 or so hands went up, which is interesting. So it sounds like this might potentially be an area that folks can continue to work on at your respective organizations. Thank you for participating in that quick show of hands. And this next slide focuses, now we're going to look at external resources. So we just kind of discussed internally, what are the human resources available to execute and develop your resource mobilization strategy. Next, we will go through some external resources. So these are some websites that you can visit to identify sources of funding. One is USAID Partners, which describes the role of USAID Partners and provides a link to usaspending.gov. usaspending.gov is actually a really useful database because you can look up awards and see and kind of see, within your sector, how much funding is going to, democracy and governance, for example, in a particular country, maybe looking at Kenya. And you'll see not only USAID, but other donors that may be of interest to you, including Department of State and Department of Labor. So you can get a broad view of where US government funding is going into other countries. Another really useful website, if you all aren't familiar, is the USAID Business Forecast, although I'm sure that many of you rely on the forecast to identify opportunities. On the next slide, we will go into a bit more detail into the type of information that you can gather from a USAID forecast. USAID also holds quarterly forecast questions and answers. And it's a really great opportunity to get information from USAID on their upcoming procurements. And so really any question is fair game. You can go very broad when asking the question to USAID. You know, if you are using kind of, again, example, Kenya and democracy and governance, you can ask a very broad question. Like if you look at the forecast and you're not seeing anything there that's related to democracy and governance, you can ask, you know, this fiscal year, does USAID anticipate any democracy and governance programs in Kenya? And they, USAID, gathers all of the questions every quarter, and then they publish answers to all of them. In some cases, they may say that, you know, USA does not have an answer at this time, but in other cases, they might provide useful information, you know, such as, you know, please look out for democracy and governance opportunities in quarter 3. And so then you'll know to continue checking the forecast for that. So really great resource and so highly recommend reviewing the forecast and also sending those questions to USAID. And USAID also recently launched a website called Work with USAID, which is a resource hub for local organizations and international organizations to navigate working with them. You can register and you can create a profile for your organization. You can also do a search to see what other organizations are working in the country that you're working in or in the particular sector that you're working in. And in that way, you may be able to find potential partners. And then for specific solicitations themselves, when they come out, you will check grants.gov for cooperative agreements and grants, and then sam.gov for contracts. And so Work with USAID and the business forecast will be before solicitations come out, and then grants.gov and sam.gov will be for live solicitations. And so then getting into a little bit more detail, this is an example from the USAID forecast of information that they might publish about a particular opportunity. So this one is malaria case management and surveillance activity in Tanzania. You can see that the award length will be 5 years, that the type of award is going to be a cooperative agreement. Other types of mechanisms might be a grant or a task order or a contract, for example. Co-creation is also useful to see. So if there might be a multi-step process or an RFI process, for example. The business forecast also very usefully includes the anticipated release date of the solicitation. Sometimes that is not adhered to, and so it's often a target, but if it says, you know, this will be a release, this example, January 14th, there's not a guarantee that it'll come out then, but that's when it's generally planned. The forecast will also show you the anticipated award date of the award, as well as the total value. So this one was valued in a range of 25 million to 49.99 million. And there is also an area that provides a description of the activity. Some are more detailed than others. This one is pretty broad. It just says supporting implementation of case management and malaria and pregnancy and surveillance activities. But sometimes that description can be very long. Sometimes it can tell you what the target geographic areas are, or even what the objectives of the program may be. And that can help you as you start to pre-position and think about partnerships or implementation strategies that you may have. USAID also recently added this change log to the forecast so that you can see what changes have been made over time. For example, in this one, the anticipated award date was pushed back a little bit. It was initially June the 13th, but then they pushed it back to July 15th. And the forecast is updated regularly. And so it is usually good practice to check the forecast, if not on a daily basis, at least maybe a weekly basis, especially if there is a particular opportunity that you're looking at and the anticipated release date of the solicitation might be soon. Other external resources available to you are from USAID are their branding and marketing strategy, as well as their style guide. When you work with USAID, I think many of you will know that you might need to include their logo on some of your materials and how they prefer to brand events or materials that are being disseminated. You can also reference an indirect cost rate guide for nonprofit organizations. So as you are developing your budgets, if your organization has an indirect cost rate or is interested in developing an indirect cost rate, you can refer to this guide for support. And then you can also visit USAID's compliance division's website so that you can see information on regulations, policies, procedures to ensure compliance with USAID and general USG rules and regulations. And then USAID also offers training series on how to work with them. And that brings us to the end of our second piece on resources that are available to support your resource mobilization strategy. And so also wanted to ask if there are any questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple. You may have touched on a few of the answers for these, but if you'd like to expand as well. So first one is, if we're thinking about how to ground business development for a capacity development plan, how do we map funding resources other than the organization's usual donor?
Yeah, that's a great question. A part of any capacity development plan will include sustainability and where are your sources of funding. And outside of your major donors, which might often be government donors, you can look at foundations, for example. I think Ford Foundation or Packard Foundation or Hewlett Foundation. A lot of foundations, at least that are based in the U.S. Are funding local organizations in areas that range from anti-corruption to climate change to supporting health and women and youth and persons with disabilities. And so part of this is just kind of doing some research and networking. Meeting with other, like-minded organizations that maybe have different funding sources, and seeing who their donors are. Or maybe if you already receive funding, or if you work with other international organizations, they can work with you on developing a capacity development plan and diversifying your funding.
Perfect. And you touched a little bit on this, but just in case you wanted to expand, in small local organizations, who's responsible for resource mobilization?
Sure. For a small local organization, as I think even with a large organization, I think that would probably be everybody. Of course, the leadership at the organization, executive directors, program managers, or program directors will have perhaps more responsibility for resource mobilization. But I think anyone can contribute. I think also sometimes a way to gather information is just by hearing from folks, out socially. You might be at dinner with somebody, and your friend might work with another local organization, and they might say, "Oh, we heard that USAID is thinking about funding this type of program. Have you heard about that?" And then you can get more information and bring that back to yours. So really, it's everybody. Everybody can support resource mobilization. I think it's just about looking within the organization and kind of seeing what are people's individual skills and strengths and networks, and how you can leverage those.
Perfect. So one of the questions is, what are some of the strategies to strengthen NGO capacity in resource mobilization?
Sure. I think that a key part of that will be kind of breaking down the resource mobilization strategy into manageable parts and seeing where there are strengths, and then where there are areas where you might need to grow. And so the resource mobilization will include just kind of the donor scoping. If you already have a good sense of who your donors are, how to navigate the business forecast, how to have conversations with donors. Maybe next you're looking at partnerships. Does your organization have strong, capability statements? Is your organization able to look at a solicitation and to pull out, like where does your organization fit? And then who are other potential partners that you can build relationships with to get on a consortium, for example. Then there's also, proposal writing, proposal management, doing budgeting. Who in the organization has skills and capacity in those areas or interest in those areas. And so I think that by taking resource mobilization and breaking it down into these distinct pieces can help you to identify areas of capacity development, and then you can slowly work towards improving those areas that you identify as potential weaknesses or areas of growth.
Excellent. So this is a great question. How do we enhance the commitment of everyone in the resource mobilization effort?
Yeah, that is a really great question. I think that this can really, it can kind of come down, I think, from the leadership level. I think that if your organization has, strong and visible leadership and someone who is well trusted within the organization, I think that the messaging there is very important. Another simple way to do it is if you have weekly meetings. Include business development and resource mobilization as part of your regular agenda items, so that there's somebody who's responsible for providing updates. And that's also a potential opportunity for someone who is interested in a particular opportunity to become more involved. Maybe somebody, for example, on the finance team is really interested in gaining skills in monitoring and evaluation. And there is a live proposal, and there's not enough bandwidth to develop a monitoring and evaluation plan. And that's a great opportunity to see who, what resources in your organization are maybe available to fill some of the gaps that you're seeing. And I think too that, part of enhancing the commitment is just kind of, by doing it, in addition to just saying things, in addition to saying, this is really important, we're all committed to the organization and we want to ensure that we're able to continue operating, and that we want to continue to work with these communities. It's also ensuring that there are opportunities for folks within your organization to actively participate, so that people can see themselves and they can see very clearly what their role and what their contribution can be in resource mobilization.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kimberly. So actually, there's some really fantastic questions coming in. But one of them that we're seeing a couple times is, do you happen to have like a detailed resource mobilization strategy or template? Is there something online that people could use to get started?
Yeah, we can send, I can send the template that we have referenced on the previous slide that kind of has like your objectives, your timeline, your funding sources, and you can use that as a base to get started on your resource mobilization strategy. Happy to do that.
Perfect. And as a reminder to everyone, we'll be sharing the presentation and a recording tomorrow morning. So you'll be able to click through to that. And we can also include the template as well, right on the web page. So that is great to know. Let's see. So here's a good question. Very few local organizations can meet all the requirements of donors, especially if they're small organizations. For instance, on project management and organizational management, what can we do to ensure that funding opportunities are not just for the same people each time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that USAID is recognizing this as well, that it, I think that receiving US government funding comes with a lot of a lot of preconditions. The agreement that you receive is, often, 50 pages long. There are a lot of requirements and a lot of regulations that you need to be familiar with. And being familiar with these regulations doesn't necessarily mean that you, are the best organization to, deliver particular programs in a particular area to a particular community. And so I think that a good way for local organizations that maybe aren't ready yet to receive direct funding from USAID are to find potential partners, often called prime organizations, that are going to be the lead organization on a particular bid. And if you work with these organizations, they may have different, less stringent requirements for your, program management or organizational or your organizational management structure. There are also different types of ways that funding can be structured. So you can, this is kind of in the weeds, but there are like cost reimbursable types of grants, but there are also fixed amount awards. And fixed amount awards will have a budget, but you might not have to or you definitely don't have to, for example, provide receipts to back up all of your expenses. Those are deliverable based. And so as long as you are delivering on the milestones that you set out in your award agreement with the prime organization, then you'll receive the funding. So maybe one of the milestones, for example, is hold 5 trainings for local partners. And if you show that you have conducted those 5 trainings, then you'll be able to receive the funding without showing, we paid for per diem, we paid for, materials and all of this. So very long way of saying working with other organizations instead of directly with USAID is a good way to receive that funding. And then oftentimes those organizations will also build capacity development into those programs. And so if you also think that you want to improve your financial systems, for example, that could also possibly be built into your award so that that organization is providing you training, technical assistance, capacity development while you're also implementing your programs.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question about how to ensure that local organizations get opportunities for these funds. And they were suggesting perhaps even by dividing the funds into more than one fund. I think a little bit what they might be talking about is like a consortium and setting up that type of thing. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the value of that and how that can strengthen your proposals.
Yes. Yes. like I said, USAID, and this is not just because of donor priorities, but really, the best way to work with local communities is to work through those who are who are closest to them, and that is often local civil society organizations or community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and your organizations are bringing incredible expertise, experience, networks, and partnerships that larger international organizations will probably never be able to have. And so sometimes those larger organizations can take on some of the burden of like the financial management and like the procurement processes, so that their consortium partners can be more focused on the delivery of the programs. And so many times, and I would say that most international organizations, if they're implementing in any country, will have many local partners who are implementing significant portions of the work. And so I think that part of that is knowing what value your organization is bringing, and also having an understanding of these potential partners, kind of knowing. Earlier I was talking about understanding your donor, and understanding potential partners or potential primes is also equally important. If you know, for example, that there's an organization that is really great on, working on maternal and child health, but a solicitation called specifically for targeting like orphans and vulnerable children, and that is what your organization focuses on. And that is value that you can bring to a consortium, because that one of the main partners does not have that capacity, then that is a good way to get on a consortium. And so I think that looking at kind of the competitive landscape, kind of seeing who's out there, what skills do they have, and then what gaps there are, and how you can fill those gaps is a really great way to find a consortium that's a good fit for your organization.
Excellent, thank you. Just reading through a few more of the questions here. So I think there might be the need to clarify a little bit. So we were saying that for resource mobilization, everyone needs to be involved, which is completely true. But there's a few people wondering about, having people that are just focused on it. What's the value of that? How much emphasis should be put on that as well?
Yes. I think that having somebody dedicated to business development is definitely valuable, but it depends on your own internal resources and whether you're able to fund that position, for example. Because I think that I've also worked at organizations where there has not been a separate business development team, and where it has been program staff who are also kind of tracking opportunities, meeting with potential partners, writing the proposals, building the budgets. And that's actually how I started to gain my experience with business development, as somebody who was doing program implementation, but who, as part of my job, also had to look for new funding. And so I think that one of the drawbacks of that, of course, is that business development, resource mobilization, is very time consuming. And I think that for anybody who has worked on a live proposal, for example, that can often, take 40 hours per week. And so if you are already somebody who is involved with program implementation, and then on top of that, you're working on a live proposal, then that just means that either, something has to give. Either you are just going to be working well over full time while a proposal is live, or you're not going to be able to, you're going to have to put some of your program implementation on hold. And so having somebody who is focused on business development can kind of alleviate some of that pressure and some of those time constraints. And so oftentimes having somebody who is kind of identifying opportunities, helping to manage proposals or helping to write proposals can be very, very helpful, especially on small teams where technical folks may also be contributing to the design of a program.
Excellent, thank you very much. Let's see, so one of the questions here, this might be a little bit more than we're covering today, but how do you address the issue of country strategy when it's different from a local funder's interest?
Let's see, does this mean, so I guess I'll answer the question of like the USA or does this mean like the country strategy of like the government of a country?
I think that's what it's mentioning, yeah.
Okay. That is a tough one because I think that normally the donor interest should be more or less supporting. Donor interest should be supporting objectives of the government. Especially as they might relate to, service delivery and things like that. So I would say that it's always important to be consistent with the mission, vision, and values of your organization. And so if you are looking at donor priorities and they are not aligned with how you implement or what some of your priorities are, then I think you'll want to maybe reconsider whether that donor is a good fit for you.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Let's see here. So here's a great question. How do you address competition in resource mobilization? So what type of things are you considering when you're sending in a proposal when it comes to your competitors?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so for competitors, you will want to kind of do your research on the other consortium. And so either, I think I have this on, we actually have like looking at competitors' proposals in the next section of the presentation, but I can still touch on this. There is a website called the Development, it's the DEC Development Experience Clearinghouse, I believe, that where there are posted like final reports, quarterly reports, final evaluations, midterm evaluations of USAID projects. And so you can search for these reports and get a sense of your competitors' experience. If there are evaluations, you can see whether there were any weaknesses that were identified, but also like what are some of the potential strengths. And then you will also know just kind of through your own networks and from your own experience, whether particular organizations, be they international or local, perceived well or perceived negatively by the community that you're working with, by donors, by others. And you'll kind of want to have that in mind as you're writing the proposal. And then in the proposal itself, you'll want to, of course, highlight what your strengths are, but then you can also think about what some of the weaknesses are of some of your competitors. So if you know that there is an organization applying that doesn't have presence in the country already, and you know that it may take them, 6 months to set up, get registered, and things like that, one of the things that you can write in your proposal is, that we are already on the ground. Our entire consortium is already, everyone is already registered. We have field operations, and therefore on day one, we can hit the ground running and have rapid project startup. or if you know, for example, that you have really strong connections with like community leaders and faith-based and youth organizations, and say that's what like the solicitation is focused on. And you know, maybe your network just is the organization that is connected to some of these groups. Then you also write that into your proposal. And if you know, for example, that your competitors don't have these networks, then you can also highlight, you know, you don't want to name them, but you can say, you know, without these connections, the program will not be successful because of X, Y, and Z. And that's a way of keeping your competitors in mind without explicitly naming them, but highlighting your strengths in a way that is compelling to the donor and can kind of make them doubt the other, your competitors.
Fantastic, thank you. Did you want to take another question or move on with your presentation?
Yeah, we can move on and then take the rest at the end if that works.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. All right, this last section is on submitting competitive proposals and budgets, which I know is often like the piece that, that folks are really interested in. So we're going to look a little bit at kind of the proposal process and ways that you can strengthen your process to make a proposal more competitive. Excuse me. So why look at processes? Why not just jump right into the technical design or something like that? And that's because processes are what allow the organization to streamline coordination to be more efficient. And it's really time saving. So proposal development, as you all know, involves multiple people working together to produce one single coherent product. And if processes aren't defined, such as roles and responsibilities, this can result in duplication of effort, or even some pieces not being done at all. So if everyone is focused on the technical design, but nobody is looking at the capacity statement or the management approach, you might get to 2 days before the proposal is due and have pieces that are missing. So good processes can help you to make sure that everything is done in a timely manner and that there aren't any gaps. And like having a proposal calendar, for example, with very defined milestones can help you to plan ahead as well. And we're also going to talk a lot about quality and compliance because compliance is key. And so another important step that that you can take as you're developing a proposal is developing a compliance matrix, and that will show you, that will be showing you how your client, your donor, is going to assess your technical and your cost proposals against their criteria. And so if you know, for example, that in the technical approach they're looking for, you know, context and sustainability as some of the main criteria, you'll want your compliance matrix to show that, so that as you're reviewing the proposal, you can reference that compliance matrix and say, okay, we're not doing a good job, or we can do more on sustainability. And it's easier to do that so that you can see what the criteria are and what might be missing in the proposal itself. And then having this tool, the compliance matrix, at the beginning of the process will also help writers and also reviewers to have a snapshot at any time of what the donor is looking for. And then finally, it's really important to remember that proposal development doesn't necessarily end when your proposal is submitted. Knowledge management is very, very important because a lot of times you can like kind of recycle parts of the proposal. USAID proposals especially often kind of have the same sections. You'll have your context, your technical approach, your activities, management plan capability section. And so if you already have language available, you can potentially reuse it. Or if your proposal is not successful and then you receive feedback from USAID and they say, you know, we really liked your, the curriculum that you proposed on X, Y, and Z, but we felt that it wasn't, it could have been strengthened in A, B, and C areas. Then you'll know that you don't want to just kind of take that same activity and like put it in a new proposal, but there'll be ways that you can improve it. And so having a good knowledge management process will save you time as you are preparing proposals in the future as well. And encourage folks in the chat to drop in any other ideas that they might have for organization or proposal management or knowledge management, just to kind of share with some of the others on the call. So yeah, please feel free to drop in any tips that you might have as we go into kind of key steps in proposal development. So after a solicitation is released, a request for application or notice of funding opportunity, it's also called a NOFO, what happens next? As we just discussed, having processes in place will allow your team to hit the ground running when that solicitation comes out. So you're not scrambling and thinking about like, okay, what do okay, we have the solicitation, but like, what do we do next? With the processes, you will be able you'll be able to know who is on your proposal team. You'll be able to outline roles and responsibilities, who is your writer, who is doing the budget, who is negotiating with partners, for example, who's doing the writing, which is very critical. And excuse me. The solicitation will need to be shared, of course, with everyone who is on the proposal team. And this includes not just the central part of the RFA, but any attachments that are available. And everyone should review all of this information before they come to the first, kickoff meeting. And so as leading up to that kickoff meeting, you should have ideally a proposal manager, proposal coordinator, at least somebody who's responsible for developing that calendar with the key milestones and that compliance matrix with the review criteria, so that folks have time to review the calendar, the compliance matrix, and the solicitation before they come to that kickoff meeting. And it might be that most of your proposal team is working on other, other projects. And so building in time to attend the kickoff meeting and the design sessions will be important. And so if they have a calendar, if you have program managers or technical experts who will be part of the program design, having that proposal calendar will help them to know, when are meetings, when are they going to need to participate, and to make sure that everyone that you need at the table contributing to the proposal is going to be available at the times that, that you've chosen. So then after the kickoff meeting, where you're going over kind of roles, responsibilities, the proposal calendar, and kind of your timeline for submission, then you'll move into your design sessions on your program activities, which will contribute to your proposal narrative. Another important part of the proposal process, if possible, are having reviews of the proposal. And I think it's also important to note here that this is kind of a, this is kind of an overall best practice, but I understand, of course, that not everybody has the time or resources to have like a super involved proposal process. So you might decide, for example, that you will have a kickoff meeting and then like one technical review. But no, like taking the guidance here and kind of pulling out what works best for your organization, like what's the best fit, is going to be more successful. Because if you simply, you have to look at what's realistic. And if you simply just do not have time or capacity to have this very involved proposal development process, then it's just not gonna stick. You might try it and then see that it doesn't work, and then then you'll just let it fall to the wayside. So you want to pull out from here like what's most relevant and what's most helpful for your organization. So with that said, there are often what are called color team reviews for proposals. And they are an opportunity for outside eyes, people who aren't working on the proposal, to review and to highlight, to highlight what are the strengths, and also maybe to pull out what are some of the areas for improvement. And it's really helpful to have that second set of eyes, or third or fourth set of eyes, to look at the proposal with a fresh perspective, because I think that sometimes as we're like working on a proposal, we can just become so focused on it that we're kind of missing things, and so that's why it's very useful to have these color team reviews. So a pink team is one of the early reviews focused on technical design. And so this early review will be of the technical proposal and will assess the proposal's technical management and staffing. And it'll be an opportunity also for outside reviewers to perhaps introduce new ideas, or if it looks like something is kind of veering off track, this will be your first opportunity to kind of course correct. If you find out that like you're proposing a lot of interventions and this is going to have implications for your budget, then this might be an opportunity to like prioritize and identify, okay, we can't implement all of these activities, so which ones are the most realistic and which ones meet the requirements of the solicitation the best. The second type of review that you can do also for the technical is a red team review. And so this is when the proposal is probably at least 90% done. And it is the last major touch point for the technical proposal. And it is where reviewers will take a look and focus on compliance and technical merit. It's usually good for the reviewers to look at that compliance matrix, the evaluation criteria, and to really see if the proposal is meeting all of the requirements of the evaluation criteria. And if it doesn't, then you will need to address those issues in a relatively short period of time, because this review usually happens like 7 to 10 days before submission, because you want to ensure that there's enough time for the writer to incorporate any feedback that's given during the red team review. And so, of course, you can understand how having 2 formal reviews of the technical proposal from an outside sets of eyes can help to strengthen a proposal. And then for the cost proposal or for the budget, we have lime or green team reviews. And these are an opportunity for reviewers to assess the cost proposal from, again, the donor's perspective, looking on cost principles such as reasonableness and allowability. Reviewers should also look at the technical design and the cost alignment. So is everything in the budget that is in the technical narrative? So if the technical narrative is saying that you're implementing activities in like 5 different regions, are you budgeting for all of those, those 5 trainings? In addition to the training, is there travel? Do you need to include accommodations, for example? And so it's important to have that review to align the technical with the cost, because they really, they can't exist without the other. And let's see. let's see. Oh, also, so sorry. Finally, on the budget review, you should also ideally include your budget narrative, because your budget narrative, I think the budget narrative is oftentimes seen as like an afterthought, but really that is a place where you are kind of justifying your costs as well. And so you'll want the donor to be able to look at your budget alongside your budget notes and to understand how those two are aligned. And everything in your budget needs to be described in your budget narrative. And they should ideally kind of be in order too. I've seen some budgets where, you know, there's personnel and let's say then there's like travel and activities, but then the budget notes will say like travel, personnel, and then activities. And then it's confusing in that way. So you also want to make sure that what's in your budget and the budget narrative line up so that they can be read side by side. And then again, along with the technical narrative. Similarly for the pink and red team reviews, the green teams and the lime teams are an opportunity to make revisions. But the green team, which is going to happen closer to submission, it'll be harder to make adjustments at that point. You know, if you find out there's a formula error and you were, you know, $100,000 over, that might be very tough to correct at that point. So that's also why having reviews early can help to ensure the quality of your proposal and your budget as well. And so key steps in proposal development, first and foremost include reviewing the solicitation very carefully, because the solicitation will have, you know, the date that the proposal is due. It'll list when questions are due to USAID. The purpose and the scope of activities, required supporting documents that you need to submit, eligibility criteria. And you really want to review and reread that solicitation to make sure that, that you're meeting all of the requirements. Because it would be, you know, really unfortunate, right? If you are developing a proposal and it is technically the strongest one, but then you don't notice, for example, that, you know, you have to use size 12 font in Times New Roman, but you use, you know, Arial in size 10. If the solicitation says that, you know, you have a page limit, that you have to use a certain font size, that you have to have a certain margin size, or that something needs to be double spaced, or that, you know, your proposal can be this type of font and this size of font, but your tables and your graphics can be, you know, a different type. You really, like, this is, it's really important because you can be disqualified if you do not meet all of the requirements that are laid out in the solicitation. And like I said, it would be really unfortunate if you come up with like the best program design, but then you know, become disqualified because of a font, right? So you really want to ensure compliance with that solicitation. And it's ideal too to have like a point person who is reviewing your proposal for compliance. And then submission, of course, is really critical as well. Like there's going to be a due date, of course. So you don't want to submit even a minute later than that due date, and it's good practice to submit at least 24 hours in advance. The solicitation will also have contact information for who or to whom or how the proposal should be submitted. And so you'll want to make sure that you know, your proposal is delivered to the person whose email address is listed in the solicitation. And it might also say, submit your cost proposal and your technical proposal in 2 separate emails. Or, you know, only send, you know, we can only accept emails up to 5 megabytes with attachments. So if you have many attachments and they're over 5 megabytes, then you're going to need to figure out the best way to separate them into different pieces to make sure that they can be transmitted in a way that meets the specifications in the solicitation. And then for technical design, of course, one of the most exciting parts of the proposal development, you will want to do your research, of course. If your organization has conducted any sort of research, you can draw from that. You may also want to, as I mentioned earlier, the USAID Development Experience Clearinghouse or the DEC to find final reports, evaluations of similar programs that were implemented in the particular country or sector that you're interested in. Looking at external evaluations, research from other organizations can also be helpful to inform not only your design, but building off what has already, been accomplished and what's been successful. And then when you are hosting design meetings, you want to make sure that you're bringing folks that have the right skills. So that you're developing innovative approaches. And so if you are working with potential partners, it's usually ideal if those partners will attend your design meetings as well, so that your final product is cohesive. There have been some times when I have read proposals with a number of different organizations, and it kind of reads like, oh, this organization is doing objective 1, this one is doing objective 2, and then another one is doing objective 3. But how the program works together and how the objectives build off each other doesn't come out strongly. And so having a design session with all partners in the room and contributing can help to ensure a more cohesive program. So that's why it's also important to seek input from people outside of your core group of technical specialists. And this is especially important for those color team reviews that I mentioned. And then after you have your design meetings, then you can get ready for outlining your vision, your approach, an outline of activities, and then a work plan. And hopefully, if you have taken the steps up to this point, your kickoff meeting, knowing roles and responsibilities, understanding the competition, knowing the competitive landscape, understanding the needs, knowing what the existing programs are, and then what your organization, what your consortium is bringing. This will make sure that you are ready to hit the ground running as you start to write your proposal. You'll have all of the information you need, as well as the process to develop and deliver a successful proposal and budget. And so for the cost proposal, it's kind of a similar process to technical design. You want to keep in mind competitive pricing, for example, making sure your costs are reasonable, so that if you're having meetings and your venue space is if it costs $100, that you say $100 and you don't put $200 for some reason. Because competitive pricing is going to be evaluated as part of the cost proposal review. You'll want to make sure that you are referring to the solicitation and making sure that any requirements that they have in the solicitation are followed as you're developing your cost proposal. Finally, you will want to ensure consistency. It's often helpful to have a budget template or as well as a budget narrative template, so that you don't have to create something new every time. The solicitations will be clear on what to include in your budget and your budget narrative. And you'll want to make sure that the budget notes, again, are directly related to all of the lines in your cost proposal, so that the reviewer can follow along and understand what's included in your budget. And ensuring consistency is also crucially important. And as I mentioned previously, one of potential pitfall is that your budget narrative, and your technical aren't exactly aligned. So if you say that you're going to provide capacity development support at the regional level, in your technical proposal, you need to make sure that all of these events, time, transportation, refreshments, materials, etc., are all budgeted as well. And then in your for your budget notes, the main purpose is to describe to reviewers how your budget relates to the activities. You can explain here why each budget item is necessary to accomplish the proposed program. And so your budget notes, some folks don't see it this way, but it's really a time for your organization to shine when it comes to competitive pricing and highlight other advantages of your cost proposal. So you are looking at, the cost effectiveness, your organization's value add, and that'll just help you to be more competitive against other potential consortiums. And I have already highlighted most of these points, but just to repeat, again, go back and make sure your cost pieces are connected to the technical pieces. Your budget notes should mirror the language from the requirements in the solicitation, and they should reflect your budget accurately. You want to be sure that you are clearly and concisely justifying your proposed costs and assumptions. Sometimes as I'm reviewing budgets, some pieces don't seem clear to me until I review the budget notes. And so I think that's also why the budget notes are very clear, because if you have a lot of activities in the budget, it's not always clear to the reader what they're corresponding to, and so the budget notes are an opportunity to clarify. And then, sorry. And then again, most solicitations will require that you include your sub-grantee budgets, and so you'll want to check your solicitation and make sure that your budget is complete. So if you are the prime, for example, and the requirements say that you have to include sub-award budgets, you have to make sure that those are part of your overall budget as well. And this is the last slide before we wrap up. But I mentioned that it's helpful to have templates so that you're not always starting from scratch. And so corporate capabilities, your past performance, which you can use in proposals as well as for marketing. So when you're meeting with potential partners, if you have a core capability statement, you can kind of just use that as you meet with potential donors, with potential partners. The budget template and budget note template, of course, like what you're costing for will change per opportunity, but if you have a template, that'll help things to go along more quickly. And then there are a number of annexes that are included with USAID proposals, including monitoring, evaluation, and learning approaches, updated staff CVs, and management approaches. And if you have a good knowledge management database, which we talked about earlier, then you can pull from past examples or these templates to make sure that the proposal development process is more smooth in the future for any future proposals. And that brings us to the end. And I think we only have 1 minute left. But I know that we took a lot of questions already, so hopefully we have answered many burning questions that you all have.
For sure. So actually, our webinars usually go until the half hour, but we could certainly talk if we need to. We do have some questions. A few of them we may have already answered, though, but let me see if I can find. Let's see. So there's a question about how can one implementing partner, engage through unsolicited proposals with USAID? And I think, you had mentioned about work with USAID, and I've also put a link in the chat, and I'll go ahead and share it again. There is a funding navigation bullet point on the website. And so that's one way, of course, to be able to actually take a look at some of the funding options with USAID, but feel free to add.
Yeah, I would say that it's usually, yeah, I would probably not suggest just kind of sending an unsolicited proposal to USAID. Usually it'll be better if you have a connection with somebody at the mission and have a conversation with that person, and let's say that they are, very interested in the type of work that your organization is doing, and they're open to receiving a proposal, then you can send one. But because USAID does have a procurement process, it's probably your chances of receiving funding for an unsolicited proposal are probably not very high. But if you are providing a stronger proposal, USAID could potentially not use your ideas, but kind of see what what some of the needs are, and maybe incorporate that into a solicitation that they then put out. And sometimes USAID might put out like sole source solicitations that they know that there's an organization that they want to work with. It's possible that by providing an unsolicited proposal, that it could result in an unsolicited ask, but I would say it's probably not as likely. So I would say it's my opinion is that is probably not the best route. But interested to hear if any others have had any more success there.
Perfect. Let's see, one of the questions is that one of the challenges for some organizations who implement some USAID funded projects is deficient capacity to develop proposals. So you talked a little bit about proposals. There was a question wondering if there's any additional curriculum from USAID about developing proposals, any other information and resources?
I think that they do have resources on some of the previous slides. There are links on how to work with USAID. Let's see. So here's one: USAID NPI quick reference responding to a funding opportunity. That is a resource. They also have training series on how to work with USAID. And so, and some of them are videos, and some of them are like slide decks. So yeah, you can just kind of dig around on at these links, and you should be able to find some resources there.
Perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and share the YouTube link for workwithusaid.org, which was what Kimberly was talking about there. So you can go ahead and click through and watch additional videos. Let's see. Is it possible to share a budget template?
I think that sometimes USAID actually shares some budget templates. So if it's useful, I think yes, I can pull one and share it.
Perfect. So any additional resources we're going to go ahead and put on the website, so you guys will be able to access it tomorrow. And then as Kimberly mentioned, she has a ton of resources within the presentation. So all of those clickable links will be available in the PDF when we put it online. And we usually get it on there first thing in the morning, so Central Africa time. So should be good to go there. let's check here. So a couple of the questions here are not so much questions as advice to other NGOs. So just as a reminder to everyone, you can actually view the Q&A box yourselves. So you can take a look at some of the resources and information that people are mentioning. There was, I think, a misunderstanding a little bit about, you'd mentioned individual donors. I think you meant like one donor versus another, not individuals donating, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Good. Just wanted to double check. We had that question a couple times there. And I think there is a general sort of feeling among a lot of the local partners that it can be very difficult to get funding, and sometimes they're not sure why they're not able to get it. So as Kimberly mentioned, you know, there's a lot of great resources out there. So the ASAP USAID webinars, that is what they are focused around. It's capacity building for local partners to become prime partners with USAID. So we've shared a link to that. And as Kimberly mentioned, the USAID, workwithusaid.gov, and I've put that in the chat, I'll do it again in a few moments, is really meant to help walk you through that. So there is a fantastic assessment that you can do. It's very similar to what's called the NUPAS assessment, the non-US organization assessment. And you can actually use it to kind of test your own capacity, your own organization's capacity, and see where you might need to you know, bolster your resources a little bit so that you can make your proposal stronger, so that you'll be stronger when you're assessed by USAID. So we'll be sure to share that as well, because I think that's a key concern, of course, for local partners, especially if it's the first time working with USAID or any large international funder. So let me see here. I'm not sure we have any other specific questions. Oh, how do you conduct a trend analysis of aid flow of key donors? So how do you do the trend analysis? How do you search for future market opportunities for your organization?
Oh, that's a great question. So the website that I mentioned earlier, usaspending.gov, can be a good place to start. So you can kind of see, as I mentioned, kind of where is the funding going. And I think that the USAID business forecast is also a great tool, at least for any given fiscal year, to kind of see for the country that you're interested in, what are some of USAID's donor priorities. I think it can if you want to go more into more detail in that, you can, but it's almost like trying to read the tea leaves. Because because I think that there's so much there's so much that's happening kind of behind the scenes, and it can take, I think, sometimes years for for an idea to actually come out in the form of a solicitation. Excuse me. So I think that it's helpful to know generally, what are the existing programs in the country that you're working in, and in the technical sector that you're working in, which can be gathered by word of mouth. Often USAID publishes this work on their website. You can also visit websites of organizations that are implementing programs, and get a sense of potential funding levels, the dates of awards. You can see like when one award is ending, and that can also help you to look into the future. And so if there is a large like HIV/AIDS prevention program that ends in 2023, then you can kind of think, well, if this program ends in March of 2023, then this means that maybe ideally a solicitation will come out at least 6 months before that, and so you can start thinking about pre-positioning then, and then reviewing the reviewing the deck, existing programs, to look forward, and then looking at the USAID spending.gov to kind of look at where donor funding has gone historically, can help you to triangulate and maybe kind of guess where funding will go in the future. And then also, like I mentioned on the slide about the business forecast, there are the quarterly Q&As. So you can also just ask a question. USAID may or may not answer, like give a straight answer if the information is unknown, but they will answer the question that you have in some way.
Excellent, thank you so much. So one of the questions that we have sort of answered by explaining about the assessment and things, but I wanted to check and see if you have any insight into this. So the question was, in your experience doing resource mobilization, what are the major specific challenges that local organizations face in securing funding from these donors?
In securing direct funding from donors, I think that well, maybe actually one of the initial steps, I think for any organization, not just local organization, is just like putting together a credible bid in the time allowed. So ideally, for any opportunity, you are pre-positioning in advance, because when a solicitation comes out, the turnaround time, as many of you know, is often like 4 to 6 weeks. And it is, I mean, it's certainly, you can put together a good proposal in 4 to 6 weeks, but it will probably be much easier, if not also stronger, if you know that an opportunity will be coming out either because of the business forecast, because you know that a program is ending, or because of other business intelligence, and you're able to start preparing for that solicitation early in the process. And that might mean identifying potential partners, who's going to write the proposal, identifying some of the key staff for your proposal. And if you do this early, then when the solicitation comes out, then you'll be better prepared in that short turnaround period of 4 to 6 weeks. So that, of course, I think is one of the major challenges in the actual kind of resource mobilization phase itself. And then I think that management of the program can also be a challenge, but maybe less related to the resource mobilization piece of it.
Perfect. And I think that covers most of our questions here. We answered a ton of them today. Thank you so much, Kimberly. I know that it always feels a little quick fire when we're just reading them out one after the other, but we really, really appreciate it. And it seems like this is definitely a topic to expand on further for future webinars. I think that it looks like people just got a great amount of information out of it. And as a reminder to everyone, we will be sharing the presentation PDF and the recording tomorrow morning on the ASAP website. And we'll make sure you can go ahead and you can click into the PDF. You'll be able to click on all of the resources that Kimberly has built into this presentation. And that'll be available tomorrow morning, Central Africa time. And I just wanted to thank Kimberly so much. Thanks again to USAID and PEPFAR for allowing us to put these webinars on every week. And Kimberly, if there's anything else you'd like to close out with, I'll hand it back over.
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for all of your really great questions. I really enjoyed speaking with you all today.
Perfect. Sorry, I was just making sure we had the poll good to go there for a moment, and I didn't realize I wasn't speaking. So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone again, and have a wonderful day.